Carl Akeley's encounter with a leopard wasn't just a terrifying brush with death. It was a defining moment in the life of one of the most daring naturalists and taxidermists in history. Known today as the father of modern taxidermy, Akeley was not a man unaccustomed to danger. He had spent his life among wild animals, from the icy slopes of Mount Kenya to the steamy jungles of the Congo. He was fearless, passionate, and determined to capture and preserve the beauty of the natural world. But on one fateful expedition in the early 1890s, that passion would nearly cost him his life. Akeley was in Somaliland, in what is now modern-day Somalia, on a hunting and collecting expedition for the Field Columbian Museum of Chicago. The terrain was rugged, wild, and teeming with predators. It was the golden age of big game hunting, long before conservation had taken root, and museums prized lifelike mounts of exotic beasts to showcase the power and majesty of the animal kingdom. Akeley was the man they turned to, and he accepted the responsibility with pride. He didn't see himself as a hunter in the traditional sense. He saw himself as a scientist, an artist, and a storyteller. Each specimen he collected was, in his eyes, a tribute to the creature's life, a way to immortalize its beauty and educate the public. But the leopard didn't care about any of that. It was early morning when it happened. The light had just begun to paint the arid landscape in shades of orange and gold. Akeley had been tracking a leopard that had recently attacked and killed a local herder's goat. The animal was clever, elusive, and dangerous. Leopards are ambush predators, known for their cunning and stealth. They strike with explosive power, often unseen until it's too late. Akeley moved quietly, rifle in hand, following the faint tracks left in the sandy earth. He was accompanied by a small team, including local guides and porters. They fanned out, scanning the scrubby bushes and low trees where the leopard might be hiding. The tension was palpable. Every rustle of leaves, every flicker of movement in the corner of the eye could be the leopard preparing to pounce. Suddenly, Akeley spotted it. A flash of spotted fur low to the ground, almost invisible against the dry underbrush. Without hesitation, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, cracking through the air, and the leopard disappeared in a blur of motion. Akeley thought he had hit it. He advanced carefully, scanning the area for signs of the wounded animal. That's when the leopard exploded from the brush, not away from him, but straight at him. It was a full-grown male, perhaps 7 feet long, with muscles coiled like springs and eyes burning with rage and pain. It was on him before he could fire again. The leopard knocked the rifle from his hands and slammed into his chest with a force that sent them both crashing to the ground. Its claws slashed across his arms and shoulders, and its jaws clamped down on his face. Akeley fought back with every ounce of strength he had. He grabbed the leopard's throat, trying to keep the fangs from closing around his windpipe. The two rolled through the dirt, a blur of blood and fur and desperate movement. The animal's breath was hot on his face, its growls vibrating through his bones. He could feel his strength ebbing, the world narrowing to the black points of pain in his vision. But he refused to die. In a final act of desperation, Akeley drove his fist down the leopard's throat. The animal choked, gagged, and finally fell still, suffocated by the very man it had tried to kill. The silence that followed was deafening. Akeley lay there, covered in blood, his own and the leopard's, barely conscious. His guides rushed to him, horrified by the sight. His face was mangled, his scalp torn, and one arm was nearly useless. They carried him back to camp, where rudimentary field surgery was performed. He was stitched up without anesthesia, every jab of the needle a reminder that he was still alive. For weeks, he hovered on the brink of death, fighting infection, fever, and unimaginable pain. But he survived. Not only did he survive, he insisted on finishing the expedition. He refused to be sent home early, refused to let the leopard be the end of his work. He continued collecting specimens, overseeing the preservation of animals that would eventually find their way into the halls of the Field Museum and the American Museum of Natural History. He would later recount the attack in his autobiography, In Brightest Africa, describing it with a kind of detached clarity that only those who have danced on the edge of death can possess. The leopard attack wasn't just a footnote in his life. It was a testament to who he was. Akeley was not driven by glory or conquest. He was driven by curiosity, by the desire to understand and preserve the wild world he loved. His encounter with the leopard became emblematic of his career, a blend of danger, passion, and relentless pursuit of knowledge. The physical scars never faded. His face bore the marks of the leopard's claws for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of that day in the bush. But Akeley wore those scars with pride. They were proof that he had faced the wild on its own terms and lived to tell the tale. His legacy endures not just in the museums that house his lifelike animal displays, but in the way he changed the field of taxidermy itself. He pioneered methods that treated the process not as mere preservation, but as art. He believed that animals should be posed in naturalistic settings, with accurate musculature and movement, so that people could see them not as trophies, but as living beings with a place in the ecosystem. He even developed the Akeley method, a system of sculpting clay models of the animals' bodies over which the hides were stretched, bringing unprecedented realism to the field. In time, Akeley's passion for wildlife turned toward conservation. He became one of the earliest advocates for the protection of African wildlife, pushing for the creation of national parks long before it was a mainstream idea. He lobbied for the establishment of Virunga National Park in the Congo, the first national park in Africa, and helped bring attention to the plight of mountain gorillas. But that story, too, had its own dangers. Years later, on an expedition to the Congo to study and film the gorillas, Akeley fell ill with a severe illness, likely dysentery or a parasitic infection. He died in 1926 and was buried on the slopes of Mount Mykono, near the very animals he had sought to protect. His grave lies in the Virunga Mountains, among the mist and the forest sounds, a fitting resting place for a man who gave his life to the wild. The leopard that attacked him that morning in Somaliland may have seen only another intruder, another threat, but in a strange way, the encounter was a moment of connection, a brutal, intimate dance between man and beast. In that moment of violence, Akeley touched something primal, something that defined the raw relationship between humanity and nature. And though he nearly died, he emerged with a deeper understanding of the world he so loved. Today, when you walk into the Hall of African Mammals at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, you'll see Akeley's work on display. You'll see elephants in mid-charge, lions frozen in tension, gorillas poised in quiet strength. What you won't see are the scars he bore to bring those animals to life. What you won't see is the man who stared death in the face, who survived a leopard's wrath with nothing but willpower and grit. But if you look closely, if you really look, you might feel it. You might sense the wild heartbeat behind the glass eyes, the breath that once warmed the air, the struggle that made the display possible. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember Carl Akeley, not just as a taxidermist, but as a survivor, a pioneer, and a man who dared to face the wild on its own savage terms. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that like button and leave a comment with your thoughts. What would you do if you came face to face with a wild leopard? Don't forget to subscribe to Lore of the Multiverse for more incredible survival stories, historical legends, and the most unbelievable true events you've never heard of. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.